These smartphone and gimbal combinations are affordable, practical, and they are getting better and better every day. But are we really at the point where we can leave this at home and take this instead?
Hello and welcome to a Stewart and Alina shootout.
For this comparison, I took out this iPhone 11 and DJI OM4 combination, and Alina, you had a Panasonic GH5, which is filming us now, and the DJI Ronin RSC2.
That's right.
The total cost of the smartphone setup is around $800, with the bulk of the cost being the phone. So we do acknowledge that the phones can be very expensive, but we're assuming for the purposes of this test that you have one. By comparison, this setup over here comes in at around $3,000, the bulk of it being the camera and the two native lenses that we used for this test.
So it's hardly a fair test, but let's just back up a little and see how we got on.
First things first, let's pop a leaderboard up on the screen. In addition to looking at value, we're going to talk about practicality, wide-angle shooting, portrait shots, stabilization, vlogging, and product shots. In terms of value, on the assumption that you already have a smartphone, given the results that we can get, as you will see throughout this video, I think the tick has to go to the smartphone. To give me a fighting chance of getting even close to Alina's setup, I used a third-party app called Filmic Pro so I could film with manual exposure settings, manual white balance settings, etc. That allowed me to set a manual shutter speed that combined with my ND filter that I clipped onto the phone. And in addition, for one of the tests, you'll see I had a clip-on telephoto lens also. Something that's come up straight away for me is the glare on the screen in this direct sun. It's not easy to see this phone. If I look at it like this, it's okay, but as soon as I get down here for these kind of low down shots, it gets really, really hard. On the plus side, this setup is very light. By contrast, I think Alina's having a slightly different experience over there.
Yes, very much so. It's very nice to have the flip out screen, but actually my arms are about to fall off already, just after a couple of shots.
Yeah, it's not even a heavy camera, but I wouldn't want to be holding that all day. Right, lucky Alina's got it, so let's get on to the next location. Given the size and weight advantages of a smartphone setup, practicality might seem like a massive win for the smartphone. However, do keep in mind, as you saw there, it can be difficult to see the screen at different angles and in the midday sun, not to mention the fact we've had a lot of overheating issues with our iPhone in particular, so there's a bit more to it than size and weight. All that being said, the tick probably still has to go to the smartphone. Alina's just done a really cool jib shot with her gimbal setup of me walking over this bridge, and I think I can replicate it pretty perfectly with this phone because we have similar fields of view. She's on a 30mm equivalent field of view. We're on about 26, I think it is, on this iPhone. Also, we're not really playing with shallow depth of field on this shot. There is a little bit of it and it will look nice because of it, but it's not going to matter that everything is in focus on this iPhone shot. So I think we can replicate this pretty perfectly. Let's try that now. There I am replicating the shot with the smartphone gimbal setup, and yes, the result is pretty similar if you ask me. Now this is where smartphones come into their own. Wide angle shots with everything in focus. It plays to the strength of the small sensors. We're not trying to achieve shallow depth of field, and as such you can make these comparisons, iPhone versus Red camera. Oh look, it's just the same. Now as you'll see when we get onto the portrait stuff, there's a bit more to it than that, but certainly when it comes to wide angle shots with everything in focus and in good light, it's worth pointing out as well, more often than not you are going to struggle to tell the difference between a smartphone and a very expensive camera. I'd say this phone gimbal combo is doing a pretty great job so far, but one scenario where I cannot see it matching the performance of our professional setup is when it comes to dreamy shallow depth of field shots. Nice portraits, nice blurry backgrounds, that kind of rotational move that you see all the time in Hollywood, the parallax that comes as a consequence of having longer focal lengths. I've got in my hand here a clip-on 2x telephoto lens. This will take the, I think it's a 26mm wide angle to about 52mm. I've got high hopes, we'll do the best that we can, but I just have a suspicion that the professional setup is going to come out on top on this one. You know, the results actually came out not too bad. Here you can see me doing some rotational moves around Alina. We're punched into 52mm. We've got a little bit of lens compression there with the background in the foreground. A little bit of blur, you could say. It looks okay to the untrained eye, all things considered. Now, this is what the shot looks like before, actually. We get into post-production and zoom in to get rid of that ridiculous vignette. The quality is really not great because we're using this ridiculously cheap unbranded Amazon lens that costs about €10. You could go down the moment route and pay up $130 for the 58mm telephoto lens, but you'll also need a $50 lens case and a ND filter mount in addition to the ND filter itself. So that little lot comes to something like $360, which is a fair bit of an investment. Sandmark is your alternative for a decent quality option here, where you can pay about $100 for the lens itself and $100 for an ND filter, all of which can be clipped onto your phone. So $200 in total for a better result. It's certainly a fair bit of an investment in your mobile filmmaking setup if you go down that route. So for now, unquestionably, we would revert to our pro setup for these portrait shots. Here we are shooting on 50mm equivalent. You can see really nice quality, good slow motion, nice bit of bokeh in the background there. But if you really want to up the ante, then we put the 85mm lens on. And oh my goodness, that's more like it. It's so cinematic. It's like a music video or some kind of fashion film or even a movie for that matter. There's just no comparison between the results that can be achieved with this setup and the smartphone setup. So with that in mind, looking at our leaderboard, it's a huge tick for the professional setup. Walking shots can look fantastic on a gimbal, but one of the problems that you might have is this upward and downward bobbing motion. One tip is to try and have a subject in your shot. We just did a couple of clips there with each system where we were the subjects, and that takes the eye away from these parallel uniform lines that can give away that bobbing motion because the eye is focused on the subject. Also, we're filming in slow motion, so that helps smooth things out a little bit. What we're going to do now is walk up that street and see if the extra weight in the DJI Ronin RSC system actually helps reduce that motion so it's heavier, but is that a benefit in this kind of situation? Well, as it turned out, they were both absolutely fantastic. Here we have a combination of the mechanical stabilization of the gimbal and also the optical image stabilization of both the phone and the Panasonic GH5 in this case. It's a beautiful combination that results in buttery smooth footage both times. Alina even decided to take her gimbal for a run, and the results were still pretty fantastic, possibly helped by the added weight in her system. So for stabilization, both are fantastic systems and both get the tick.
Vlogging and walking. Talking and vlogging. I wonder actually if we should switch to a wider lens just so that I can bend my arm and keep it a bit closer. And
so you're on a 30mm equivalent lens, and to get those shots, which look really nice by the way, but you have to have your arm like that.
Yeah, straight out. And only one, because otherwise then I look kind of hunched. Just to warn you, this is the last take.
How are those arms doing?
Not very well. I can bring my arms closer though. I can put them on my hips and I can just walk around like this.
Go gadget arms. Right, I'm filming this on the wide angle lens. We're not going super wide or anything like that, just a standard lens here on the iPhone. I can't see myself, so that's just something you need to get used to. But actually, in a way, it stops you being distracted by an articulating screen. I make a point of looking at this lens as opposed to looking at the screen, which can disengage you from the viewer. So that's, I suppose, a positive. Righto, I can't listen to that audio any longer. As you can hear, the fountains are very, very distracting because we don't have a shotgun mic recording the audio. We need some kind of directional microphone so that it's prioritizing the sound coming from my voice and not the ambient noise around the phone. In truth, I would take a GoPro 8 with its hyper smooth all day long over the iPhone setup, and as for the GH5, yes, it looks a lot better than the phone, but the system is just too heavy. So for the purposes of this comparison, the win has to go to the phone.
What are you up to?
This macro attachment is great fun. I can get so close
Don't drop it in the steak.
Yeah, I don't want to hit my steak with it. The results of our cheap clip-on macro lens actually were quite good. They wouldn't stand up to any professional scrutiny, but it does add a little bit more versatility in your run-and-gun smartphone filmmaking setup. Now we have the standard lens in play again, coming down into focus using the iPhone 11. You can see there's a little bit of a wobble there because we have very small movements, but if we stabilize it in Final Cut we get this beautiful smooth motion, and the result probably is comparable with what we can achieve using a more professional setup. In truth, I would never go to a smartphone instead of a more professional setup if I had the choice for these shots, but hopefully we can inspire you that you can get some pretty astonishing results with your smartphone if you just have a little bit of expertise behind you. All that being said, the proof of the pudding is in the results, and the results are pretty similar, so it's a tick for both setups. Right folks, what did you think? Given the relative deficiencies of the smartphone setup when you compare it with a more professional setup, I think it's fair to say the phone did an amazing job. I think the important thing is to understand your camera's limitations and work around them, and understand its strengths and use that to your advantage. There's always going to be strengths and weaknesses in different systems, but you can always use that in a way that benefits you. Anyway, stick with us in the channel. We're going to show you how to get the most out of your gear, how to do more with less. It's a pleasure to have you following along, and we will see you next time.